emotions are high, and quite rightly so. This has been horrific. I mean, I listened to your station, LBC, yesterday, and you could just tell by the presenters, I think, that this was unprecedented, that there was real... I mean, I think I heard some of the presenters say they've never, ever reported on a case like this before, and we've had some horrific cases in this country, sadly.
Well, our reporter, Liam Gotting, has been reporting on this right from the start. And the emotions, I mean, you are there to report, but on a case like this, you can't help but get emotionally involved. And he said he'd never been in a courtroom where all that had happened yesterday, where the defendant caused such disruption. And in 14 years of presenting phone-ins, I've never heard anything like it with a reaction from people, because people did listen to the judges summing up, they did listen to the victim statements. And I had grown men in tears.
Yeah.
You don't get that very
just to visualise that in that courtroom.
Was the emotion fury? Was it anger? Was it, as we've heard from two Reform MPs, bring back capital punishment?
It was all of that. I mean, look, you know this, as a presenter, you're not there to whip up a storm. And I kept saying, well, look, my heart says what you're saying, but my head says something very different. And you can't get carried up with the emotion, even though the emotion is completely understandable. We do have to, and that's why Keir Starmer announced a public inquiry, we do have to look at some of the things that happened and think, well, do we need to at least tweak our legal system a little bit? And all the stuff about him, well, was he a terrorist, wasn't he a terrorist? I think that's got to be looked at, and I think that has really driven a lot of this. Well, if someone's got ricin in their bedroom that they've made, which apparently could have killed 13,000 people, if they've got an Al-Qaeda manual, I mean, that, to me, indicates a terrorist motive, but apparently the authorities said not.
Well, because they didn't know about that? I think at the earlier stages.
I mean, everything you've said is just so true, and I think it's... I mean, the amount of detail, obviously, in the court, I think it's been, you know, a lot, sections of the media said, we just don't want to put that in our papers.
And we have as well this morning.
Well, I think that is very sensitive and empathetic to people. But, and the issue of him and being a terrorist, I mean, of course, what he did was to basically create terror. And let's not forget that he had also had plans possibly to go into his old school. And his parents did report him in terms of knife a number of times. There were lots of red flags. That's why it's absolutely right that Yvette Cooper has announced this public inquiry. He was referred to the PREVENT programme, which was set up to deal with particularly young people who might be groomed or get involved in acts around terrorism to an ideology. But it doesn't appear that he's been able to identify an ideology. What we have, and I'm afraid he's not the only one, is children and young people, particularly going through puberty, becoming obsessed about violence. I mean, I don't think we have got something to deal with this. Going on a PREVENT programme, being sent off to, when they're not in school, to another school where apparently they weren't even following up when he was absent, isn't enough. We need something else to deal with children who are being brought into violence online that does result in them wanting to commit violence and terror, but it's not in the same category as terrorism as we know it. And we've got to find an answer to that.
You're absolutely right, Caroline. I think everybody would agree with that. And just in case people aren't familiar, of course, it's not just sort of semantics, whether we call it terror or not, doesn't it? It gives police and investigators different factors in their investigation. They can hold people for longer. They can...
Exactly.
So it has a very practical purpose as well, doesn't it?
But this isn't the first time that this sort of thing has happened. Okay, it's a unique circumstance where somebody goes and kills 3 young girls. But let's remember the David Amos murder, terrorist murder. I'd like to know why there still hasn't been an inquiry after that, because he was somebody, the Harbi Ali, who killed David Amos. He was picked up by PREVENT, and then nothing happened after that. And the Amos family are rightly, in my view, questioning why the government has been very quick to announce an inquiry here, but still won't even meet
Well, we spoke
David
to
Amos's wife.
David Amos's daughter on the show yesterday. I'm sure you saw it, and she was very, very passionate, and I felt really still furious about it.
Absolutely.
You know, there was anger there as well as compassion and passion about it.
I get that, but I also think there are lots of other examples. Only in this last week, we've had a 14-year-old murdered with a knife by another child. We had, is it Brianna, I think, who was a transgender girl who was killed by 2 young people as well. Something is going on here that is, you know, I don't want to damn everything that's online, but there is something about that is fueling a violence amongst kids that we need to find a way to deal with. And I don't think we've got a suitable answer to that. They are maladjusted to the extreme. Yeah. There are flags being, you know, red flags going up, and we haven't got a... They need to go somewhere where early on, so in some ways, they can be rewired away from what they...
We won't go away from that, but I know we want to drill into this more, but we've said we didn't want to give a lot of the detail this morning on the programme because it is so distressing, but you can't get away from the fact that at the centre of this, little ones have lost their lives. Yeah. Others, more than those 3, have had their lives affected, and adults as well. And these were some of the families and people that knew the girls and were their statements in the sentencing yesterday. Let's just have a listen.
Well, we've got some of the lines here. These are some of the stuff that the newspapers have picked up in the headlines, actually. So let's read some of these out. The Express referred to the comments from some parents of cruel and pure evil, the act of a coward. The Telegraph referred to, we face a lifetime of grief. He should face the same. I mean, just that line.
Absolutely.
Just that line itself is so powerful.
And the teacher said that they couldn't... just had huge survivor's guilt. When people praised her bravery, she said, well, I can't accept that bravery. I can't accept that praise because I'm living
her victim
and they
statement in full, where I think I've got the right statement here.
Yes.
I'm a 36-year-old woman. Whenever I go out of my house now, I'm looking behind me. Yeah. I'm a 36-year-old woman. This happens to me. This is my thought process now. It's completely changed their lives, understandably.
And I thought the Independent's headline, give me a reason for what you did. Yeah. And I think that it comes to the heart of what families are going through at the moment. You know, what you know, Amos's daughter, who was on the show yesterday, what she's going through. People at least deserve some kind of closure and reasoning. And this evil young man played antics in the court yesterday. Not only were they not able to get any kind of reasoning, he made an absolute mockery of that court.
Adil, he's been doing it all the way through, hasn't he? Yeah. And what happened yesterday, I mean, there's a big debate about, isn't there, on previous cases, about people convicted of horrendous crimes being in court to hear their sentences in person. And then what we saw with this person is completely no remorse, no sense of repentance at all, and basically trying to make a mockery out of a situation must have been heartrending for everybody there.
But the fact is, you know, this is going to carry on and on and on. You know, you mentioned the murder in Birmingham. That is an area I grew up in Hall Green in Birmingham. Yeah. And you know, when we think of if we don't know the areas, we think of areas. We think, oh, I bet it's run down. I bet it's in a city. I bet it's where. I'll tell you what, Hall Green is not. In fact, you know, my mother moved to just near there because it was an aspiring place to be. It is just like, you know, a really lovely, lovely place. This is a problem in this country that's happening everywhere, and we've got to get a grip on it. It's not happening in many other countries. It's a Western phenomenon. In America, you've got gun crime. We have got knife crime. And we can't just treat this as, well, there's another incident, we'll just brush it under the carpet, whatever. We need an inquiry, and we need to look into why young people feel that it's fine to have knives, and it's now become almost normalised in society.
I think that's right, but I think also we need to have action straight away. He was found on a bus, I understand, with a knife, and the police took him home.
Yeah, took him home to his mother, and they said to his mother, just keep knives out of reach.
Exactly, and the parents did report him on a number of occasions, and in fact, I think stopped him, going in a car when he had a plan to go into his old school, and who knows what he might have wreaked there.
And
so it's what we do, not just talk. What are we going to do about this?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Because regardless of not about this individual who we don't want to give the publicity for, but because, of course, what he's done has meant you can't help but... And the sentencing yesterday talk about the sort of horror of it all. But, you know, whether he was unstable, damaged, whatever, the fact is that the knives are being carried and therefore it breeds others thinking, well, I want a knife
well,
to protect myself, rather like you have in America with guns.
If you've been watching Coronation Street, but there's been a brilliant storyline on that which shows the consequences of somebody, a young kid, I think it was 14 years old, carrying a knife, and then the knife ends up being used in a fight, not by the guy that had the knife because he thought it was to defend himself, but it kills his friend Mason, who's now obviously out of the series. Very, very powerful. But you then wonder, well, how many 14-year-olds are watching Coronation Street? But it's an important contribution to the public debate, I think.
Yeah.
But parents often want help and they ask for it.
But what about...
not there.
We touched on it briefly. What about this sort of discussion about the death penalty? We've got to talk about it. I mean, it was discussed a lot on your radio show yesterday, last night. You know, 2 Reform MPs have been calling for the death penalty. Lee Anderson and Rupert Lowe both backed the death penalty for Rudakubana in this case. Is it even something that we can even realistically consider in the UK, Caroline?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that deals with what we've just been talking about, does it really? It's not going to deal with a situation where you've got someone like this. The fear of that is not going to necessarily stop that behaviour happening.
It's just worth reminding people the reason why we don't have death penalties is because some of the injustices.
Yeah, exactly.
And innocent people can't... I mean, let's remember the Guildford 4, Birmingham 6 and, you know, and various other individuals over the years.
I'm not in favour of the death penalty, but that argument actually is quite out of date with DNA evidence now. So it's very unlikely that you would have a miscarriage. However, I think the last time we had the death penalty for anyone under the age of 18 was about 400 years ago. So... I mean, he was 9 days short of his, I think, 18th birthday when he committed the offence. Now, there is an argument to say, well, youngsters are more adult now. I mean, we want to give votes at 16. Should the age of majority be brought down in the legal system? I think that's a perfectly reasonable argument to have. I'm worried about some politicians like Lee Anderson and Rupert Lowe coming out with this because I think they're using it as a backdoor way for us to come out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Because if we reimpose the death penalty, I think we would be expelled from the European Convention on Human Rights, which would suit their political agenda. Now, you can have the argument whether we should remain a member of it, but I don't think they should be using this as a backdoor way of doing that.
No, that's true, but I think people feel that when someone has admitted guilt, when the evidence is as clear as, you know, it appears to be, and they indeed have admitted it, why are we keeping them alive, people would say? Why are we paying in our taxes when we want to put money to hospitals and others?
Because we're a humane society and we don't believe in the death penalty. Now, I had one caller yesterday saying, well, of course, when he's in prison, the other prisoners will deal with him, which, I mean, is a pretty stark thing to say, but...
I think, you know, look, I know sometimes when there's polls of the public, there's a sort of majority in favour of bringing it back into it, but often when people actually talk about it, it's not true anymore. Well, that's interesting to hear because of a long time it was. But even when it was, I think when people talked about different cases, they would say, OK, well, not for that, but for this. I think what people want to know is there's action to prevent these things happening. And if the, you know, whatever the scheme, but also that justice is served. And I think in some cases that does mean a life sentence has to mean life. And I do believe that.
So it's 52 years, but that doesn't mean that he will come out at 52 years. That's the minimum, isn't it?
So he'd be 70 when he was eligible for parole. But he has to be recommended for parole. I mean, it doesn't just automatically mean that he would come out. So, I mean, none of us will be around at that point, but I think it's highly unlikely that he would ever be released. But he is going to become the equivalent of Peter Sutcliffe, Myra Hindley. He'll be one of those names that we talk about for years to come.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this and the consequences and the potential public inquiry that may come out of it, and we'll be speaking to
they've confirmed that it's happening,
Defence Secretary later today as well, and we'll put questions to him. And our thoughts, again, with all the families and the community in Southport, which I'm sure are still feeling the pain of all of this. Let's move on. Millions of people have been urged to stay at home as Storm Eowyn is set to bring potential life-threatening winds to the north and the west of the UK. Now, we're hearing this time and time again now in the UK and all parts of the world, these severe weather weather conditions. This, as Laura's been telling us, could be one of the worst we've seen in many, many, many years.
I think in Ireland it's the storm of the century, isn't it? Since 1945.
Do you think we're well prepared for this kind of stuff now, Caroline?
I don't think we're probably as well prepared as we should be, and part of it is I think in decades ago we might have a really one bad winter, but it was always sort of like, well, are we really going to invest in the sort of infrastructure we need where there's countries like the north of Canada which has this every year, but I think now we have to recognise that whether it's these storms or floods, it's becoming more and more part of what's happening around the world, which is these extreme weather conditions, which I would say climate change is a contributory factor to, that is wreaking havoc on people's lives, on the economy and everything else. So maybe that's something we do need to look at, about how we build, our communities, what sort of housing we put up, how do we protect the rail network. I'll be going back up to Yorkshire this morning, so who knows what who knows what might happen there. But yeah, it's very frightening for people in the eye of it. I mean, it's terrifying. Absolutely.
Well, we've already had people contacting us saying they've been up all night, they're absolutely terrified, never seen anything like it. It's not as though they're 20, they've seen a lot. Anglesey has got 83-mile-an-hour winds. Sue's been in touch, been awake since 1 a.m, hasn't eased off. I mean, it is frightening. Do we also need to emotionally prepare for this? Because in the sense that we just have to accept people can't go out, can't go to work, don't battle on. Is this just something we live with now?
In the end, it's about resilience and how resilient as a society and as individuals we are. And there's only a certain amount individuals can do. I mean, you can try and make sure that sort of your roof is secure, but I mean, what else does an individual do apart from things like that? Yeah. So I think this is where the authorities come in, it's where government comes in, it's where local government comes in. But with the resources that particularly local government has at the moment, I mean, Caroline's right. We don't invest huge amounts in snow ploughs or gritting because it's very rare that it snows nowadays. Yeah. In Germany, it's completely the opposite. You have to. So it's a judgment that local and national politicians have to make about sort of what scarce resources they're going to
This is we are to Scotland live pictures that we're looking at now. You're hoping to go to Leeds. All trains and transport cancelled in Scotland this morning. We know that already. And in a strange kind of way, it almost looks rather beautiful, but doesn't it? It looks like
weather is beautiful.
It is beautiful, but being in it is terrifying, and the last thing anyone wants to do is to go and take a picture. They're stay indoors and hunker down.
Before we run out of time, I want to make sure we get this in. Now we don't know whether there's any severe storms in East Anglia. Probably going to avoid it, but it was certainly a bit stormy in the 80s. Let's have a look at two pictures that we've uncovered.
We don't just throw these two together on
from the University of East Anglia. Let's have a look. I think we have two pictures. Look at that. That's Stormy Caroline on the right.
And which one is Iain?
Iain wasn't at that party, by the way.
So Caroline looking fabulous on the right
Iain with the same haircut as Caroline back then.
Yeah. No, I had hair, believe it or not.
So were you two studying at the same time?
We were.
Yeah. We had a...
Did you know each other?
Did you know each other?
Oh, right. We were both active in student politics. I can remember a student union debate once where I was head of the Conservatives. Caroline was very prominent in Labour. And I don't know whether you instigated this debate, but there was a debate on VAT on tampons and whether it should be either reduced or taken away. Right. And I stood up and supported her.
Oh, wow.
Much to her surprise.
Yep.
Possibly horror.
Yeah, cross the floor to join Caroline. Was that the last time he supported you, Caroline, politically?
In those days, probably,
Yeah, exactly.
We've matured a bit since then.
Well, thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.